A city's biggest danger wasn't an army outside the walls. It was an empty granary. The real story of civilization, it's in the quiet systems, the clever systems, the ones that turned scarcity into survival. By the end, you'll know the 20 ancient storage secrets, the ones that built our world, and the lessons they still have for us. How a Persian empire kept ice in the desert. What clever design let an Andean civilization thrive without wheels. We'll uncover the lifeblood of early cities. Forgotten warehouses, living larders. What do you think is the most important resource a society can store for its future surplus was the first real problem we ever solved. For so long it was just hand to mouth, following herds, taking what you could find each day. Then there was this idea, you could plant seeds, you could wait, and then you'd have more than you could eat right then. That act, that waiting, it created a new problem. All that bounty would rot, pests would get it. Long before the next harvest even came, the whole idea of staying in one place, it depended on this. How do you save what you have today for what you'll need tomorrow? The answer didn't just save food, it built everything. Historian says it directly. Storing food was the most important factor, the most important one in civilization rising. Think about that. It wasn't the wheel first, it wasn't metal, it was the granary, the storage pit. That's what changed things. Because with a reliable store of grain, people could stop worrying. Even for a short time, they didn't have to think about the next meal. That security created time, and time is what civilization runs on. Now, not everyone had to farm. One person could be a potter making jars for that grain. Another could be a mason building walls to keep it safe. Another could watch the stars to learn the seasons for planting. Specialization started with a jar of wheat. Trade networks began. You could travel with goods knowing there was food back home. And with all this surplus in one place, a new authority appeared. Someone had to manage it, protect it, decide who got how much. Centralized power from elders to kings, it often started at the granary door. Without these storage systems, communities stay small, vulnerable, stuck in the cycle of harvest and hunger right away. Every great city, Uruk, Rome, they were built on a mountain of saved grain. It's the quiet foundation of everything. So looking at these 20 ancient systems, it's not just about pots or holes in the ground, it's the architecture of society. The first system takes us back to the beginning, to a simple hole in the earth. That first solution was just a hole in the ground, a pit lined with straw, but civilization needed more than that, it needed a system. And on those flat plains between the Tigris and Euphrates, the first real cities were appearing. Uruk, And with them the first truly monumental storage system, the communal granary. These weren't just big baskets, they were the physical heart of the city-state, the economic heart. Picture a massive raised platform made of mud brick or a series of tall cylindrical silos. This was the city's bank, its insurance policy, its center of power, all in one. The design was practical. Raised floors kept moisture out, kept rodents out, and they built these clever ventilation channels into the walls. Little air tunnels. They let a steady breeze circulate to fight off the mold that could ruin a whole harvest. But the real innovation wasn't in the bricks, it was in the management. This grain wasn't just sitting there. It was collected as a tax, as tribute from the farmlands that fed the city. Temple priests, royal administrator. These early bureaucrats, they recorded every basket that came in. They wrote it all down on clay tablets. They were the guardians of the city's future. And this centralized store did more than ward off famine. It became the engine for everything else. If you needed to build a new temple or a city wall, you paid the workers in rations from the granary. If an army needed to be fed, the soldiers drew their supplies from the same source. It was an early form of currency, an early form of state welfare. It created a society where not everyone had to farm to eat. This system created stability, incredible stability. But it also created a new kind of power. Control the grain and you control the people. The granary was the ultimate tool for social order. It proved that a complex society could thrive, not just survive. It could thrive by pooling its most vital resource in one place, one protected, managed place. It was the prototype. For every state warehouse that would ever come after, a city's granary was only one piece. To keep a whole kingdom alive, the system had to be enormous. And on the Nile, they built what might have been the most finely tuned storage system in the ancient world. The river's floods were predictable, gentle. They set a rhythm. A year of huge surplus, then years of steady, manageable growth. Egypt didn't just hope. They built their society around that cycle. Their answer was the state silo complex, not a single building but a network. Rows of large, conical shapes made from mud brick built for strength. Tomb paintings show them clearly. They were placed right at the river's edge near the main ports. That was the logistical key. After harvest, grain went onto barges, floated down the Nile, poured straight into those tall storehouses. But the real genius wasn't the architecture, it was the paperwork. An army of scribes worked for the pharaoh's administration. Their job was to record everything. Every measure of emmer wheat, every basket of barley going into a silo written down, meticulous inventories on papyrus scrolls. This was the first real supply chain management. They knew exactly how much they had, where it was, how long it needed to last. That bureaucratic precision allowed something new, planned redistribution. In the lean years when the flood was smaller, the state didn't panic. They opened the silos. Rations were calculated, handed out to the people, preventing real hardship. That system created deep social stability, but it also fed ambition. Where do you think the grain came from to feed the tens of thousands building the Great Pyramid? It came from those silos. The state could mobilize a huge non-farming workforce because the food was already accounted for, already stored, already secure. The pyramids are a testament to engineering, sure, but they're just as much a testament to logistics, to that quiet, administrative miracle of knowing what you have and where to send it. That logistical mastery, written in hieroglyphic records, is what held a kingdom together for 3,000 years. So the foundation of eternity, it turns out, was a well-kept ledger. And a cone of mud brick full of golden grain, the greatest threat wasn't drought, it was heat. That silent, relentless desert heat that ruins everything. On the ancient plateaus of Persia, engineers faced that enemy. Their answer was one of the most elegant feats of ancient thermodynamics. The name means ice pit. But it was more than a hole. It was a towering domed structure, often made from a special insulating mortar called a mix of clay, sand, ash, and egg whites. It looked like a giant beehive-shaped oven, but its purpose was the opposite, to create and preserve cold in a landscape of fire. The system started with a qanat, a gently sloping underground tunnel. It tapped mountain aquifer water and brought it to the surface miles away. In winter, they directed that channeled water into shallow, shaded pools. On those clear, freezing desert nights, the water would turn to ice. Workers cut the ice into blocks, hauled it inside the real magic happened inside. The structure had a massive underground storage pit, sometimes going down over 50 feet. The thick insulating walls and the dome shape minimized heat transfer, but there was a tall chimney-like tower. It caught the faintest breeze, funneling it down into the depths of the pit. As that air descended, it cooled further, creating a constant, natural refrigeration cycle. The result was a space that could stay below freezing all through the scorching summer. This wasn't for luxury. It was a vital food preservation system. Dairy, meat, fruits, they could all be kept fresh for months. It embodied a deep understanding of passive cooling, using architecture and physics to defy the environment. To stand before in the desert is to see ancient ingenuity at its most poetic. It turned the harsh winter night into a resource and stored the very essence of cold to fight the heat of tomorrow, preservation as an art form. But what about a civilization that had to store not just food but an entire way of life? Across impossible terrain, Rome built on a scale that was just unprecedented. The Persian had mastered cold, but Rome mastered volume. The lifeblood of an empire of millions, it didn't flow from one granary. It moved through this vast, thrumming network, these warehouses. To see their power, you'd go to Ostia, the port. Massive brick and concrete structures, several stories high, standing shoulder to shoulder along the water. These weren't sheds, they were fortresses of surplus, engineered with precision. The Roman, it was a practical design. The floors were raised on short pillars. That system was called, it created an air gap underneath, fighting the damp that could spoil tons of grain. The walls were thick, fire-resistant brick and concrete. Inside, the space was a grid, sturdy brick compartments, so different goods could be stored separately, accounted for. These warehouses held the entire Mediterranean. In microcosm, grain from Egypt, amphorae of olive oil from, barrels of wine from Gaul, all of it flowed into these repositories, the logistical nodes. But this was more than storage, it was about control. The state-operated system took that stored abundance and turned it into a tool, governance. The care of the grain supply, it was one of the most important jobs in Rome. Its purpose was simple in aim, profound in effect, to provide a steady, subsidized supply of grain to the common citizens, the plebeians. This was the empire's social contract, written in wheat. A full stomach meant a quiet city. Political stability was purchased with the contents of those. And this network did more than pacify the city. It fueled expansion. Legions marching to distant frontiers, they were supplied from regional, stocked from this same system. The warehouse was the unsung engine of conquest. It let Rome project power further, sustain it longer than any state before. So to show us something, storage infrastructure, when it's woven into the fabric of the state, it becomes more than a safeguard against shortage. It becomes the architecture of political power, the physical manifestation of an empire's promise. And its control, Rome's power came from its ports. But imagine an empire without wheels, without pack animals, without any written records. That was the Inca in the Andes. They built a storage system so huge, it made Rome's warehouses seem like a small pantry. They built think about that landscape. Huge mountain passes, deep valleys, a completely vertical world. The Inca connected it all with a royal road system over 25,000 miles long, and along those roads they built their lifelines. Thousands of stone storehouses placed on slopes built into cliffsides. These were they weren't centralized like a Roman warehouse. They were decentralized by design. A web of security strung across the peaks. The placement was strategic, were built at different altitudes. Each zone stored what grew best there. Lower valleys held maize and chili peppers. Higher up they kept quinoa and freeze-dried potatoes. That was, potatoes left out on the freezing plains at night, then trampled by foot to squeeze out the moisture. What you got was a lightweight, durable food that could last for years. A perfect ration for an army. Textiles and tools were stored here too. They held the empire's entire material wealth. But how do you manage thousands of storehouses without writing? The Inca used a complex system of knotted cords. Different colors, not types, positions on the string. They represented numbers, goods, even stories. Keepers, the empire's accountants, could tell a governor exactly how many bundles were in 2 valleys away. It was a portable, durable database, a tactile language of administration. This network was the empire's beating heart. When an army marched, it didn't carry all its supplies. It drew from the nearest. When a community was hit by a drought or a frost, the state would redistribute goods from a full storehouse to an empty one. This wasn't charity. It was a system of reciprocity and control. The state provided security. In return, it demanded loyalty and labor. There was the physical proof of the Inca's power and his care for his people. It turned the Andes' biggest weakness, its fragmented vertical geography, into its greatest strength. A mountain could be a fortress, but 1,000 storehouses on 1,000 slopes, that was an empire. The Andes were stone fortresses. But in ancient China, on those wide plains, security was built down into the earth. The long-term answer wasn't a tower or a mountain storehouse. It was burial. They built these networks of underground grain pits, storage as concealment, as preservation. The design was practical. Workers would dig a large pit bell-shaped into the hard earth. They lined it with layers of straw or fired clay to block moisture, then filled it with millet or wheat. The final step was the seal, a thick layer of straw mats over the grain, then a heavy cap of tamped earth. That created something special inside, an anaerobic environment, almost no oxygen. In that stillness, the metabolic processes that cause spoilage, they slow to a crawl. Pests couldn't reach it, rodents. Earth's own cool temperature acted as a natural insulator. Grain could be preserved for years, not just months, but this was never just food science, it was philosophy made physical. In Chinese statecraft, a ruler's virtue was measured by preparedness. The philosopher Guan said it centuries before the Common Era. He said, when granaries are full, people understand ritual social norms. When granaries are empty, they know disgrace and disorder. Full storehouses meant a stable, moral society. Empty ones meant chaos was near. That idea crystallized into a system. The ever-normal granary, formalized in the Han Dynasty. The goal was in the name, to keep things ever-normal, stable. The state would use these underground reserves to manage the market. In years of bumper harvest, grain was cheap, farmers suffered, the government would buy the surplus at a fair price. Store it then in lean years, during a crisis, when prices threatened to skyrocket, the state would release that stored grain. Sell it at a lower, controlled price to feed people. This was a revolutionary concept, one of the earliest forms of large-scale economic intervention, a buffer against famine and economic shock. It used storage not just as a physical safeguard but as a tool for social justice, for macroeconomic balance. There was more than a pit. It was a policy, a promise etched into the land, a promise the state would smooth out the peaks and valleys of an agricultural world. That the bounty of a good year could be buried like a seed, to sprout as security in a bad one. The in China was hidden, buried away. But over in the Aegean, in those bright Minoan palaces, storage was out in the open. You walk into a storeroom on Crete and you're not looking down into pits. You're standing among giants. Huge ceramic jars, rows of them, some taller than a person. These were the pith, the standard storage jar all across the ancient Mediterranean. That was the seventh system. A technology of beautiful, brute simplicity. They were made from coarse clay, with incredibly thick walls. That bulk gave natural insulation against the heat and strong protection from pests, from damp. They were the multi-purpose container of that age. One pithos could hold hundreds of gallons of olive oil, the liquid gold of the region. Another would be filled with wine or grain or dried figs and fish. They were the pantry, the cellar, the treasury, all in one sturdy ceramic form. Their design kept evolving. Over centuries, potters added practical features. A spout near the base for easier pouring, heavy sealable lids, and sometimes, for better temperature stability, they'd bury the jars partway into the storeroom floor so the cool earth itself became part of the system. But the pithos was more than a big pot. It was a unit of account. In the later Mycenaean palaces, scribes used linear B on clay tablets. They kept meticulous records. These ancient inventories list in precise detail the contents of the storerooms. So many jars of oil, so many of wine. The pithos had become a standard measure, a way to quantify wealth, to run a complex redistributive economy where the palace collected, stored, and rationed goods out to craftspeople, to officials, to servants. The jar was the fundamental building block of that whole economic structure, and maybe their greatest testament is their silence, their durability. Fired clay is nearly indestructible. Wood rots, metal corrodes, but the pithos often survives intact, buried for. For archaeologists, finding a storeroom of these jars is like opening a time capsule. Residue analysis can tell us what was last stored inside: traces of olive oil, grape, grain. Their sheer presence in ports, in palaces, in humble homes maps the flow of ancient trade, the rhythm of daily life. They were a simple technology, yes, but profoundly effective. Constant ceramic witness. A reminder that civilization needs vessels. It needs containers to hold its bounty before that bounty can build anything else. A ceramic pithos stayed in one place in a storeroom. But if your life wasn't in one place, if you moved with the seasons, then you needed something else. Across the forests and plains of North America, indigenous cultures had that other way. Their answer was the cache pit. That was the eighth system, a technology for a life in motion built on impermanence. It wasn't a monument. It was a secret in the ground, known only to the people who made it. You started by choosing the spot. Well-drained soil, often on a slight slope so water would pool. Then you dug the pit, bell-shaped, wider at the bottom than the top. That shape was important. It made a stable, cool chamber, and it made it harder for animals to get inside. You'd line this earthen vault, dried grasses, sheets of bark, sometimes animal skins. That layer was a buffer to keep the soil moisture away from what you stored. Then you filled it. Acorns, hickory nuts gathered in the fall, sun-dried berries, strips of venison or bison smoked and preserved, seeds for the next planting. Each thing placed carefully into this underground larder. The final step was the seal, a large flat stone over the opening, then covered with a mound of earth and leaves. To anyone passing, it just looked like the forest floor. Inside, a kind of preservation happened. The earth's constant, cool temperature made a natural refrigerator. The sealed environment became low in oxygen. That slowed decay dramatically, and it kept pests away. Food stored like this could stay safe, edible, not just for months but for years. This was decentralized storage. Each family or clan would have their own network of these hidden pantries scattered across their territory. It was a deep, place-based knowledge. Knowing which soils drained well, which foods stored best together, how to camouflage the site. This system was the backbone of a mobile life. In summer and fall, people would harvest and process the bounty, creating these buried reserves. Then when winter came or during seasonal travels, they could return to these known locations. They could retrieve what they needed. It was a self-reliant form of food security. No centralized authority, no written records. It wove storage right into the rhythm of the land and the movement of the people. The cache pit didn't try to conquer the environment, it worked with it, using a quiet understanding to turn the earth itself into a guardian for tomorrow's meal. It was survival hidden in plain sight. That hidden pit in the forest floor worked. But up north in the colder parts of Europe, they didn't just hide their stores, they built right on top of them. The ninth system goes underground into the foundation of a home itself, the Sunken-Featured Building. It sounds complicated, but the idea was simple. You dig a rectangular pit, 3 or 4 feet deep. You set posts at the corners, build a wooden roof over it, and you have a semi-subterranean space. For early Germanic and Viking groups, these were versatile, a workshop one day, a weaving shed the next, but one of their key roles was as a root cellar. That pit dug into the earth created a perfect microclimate. The temperature stayed constant, just above freezing, even in summer. The humidity was higher than the air outside. It was the ideal place to keep the harvest through a brutal winter. Turnips, carrots, parsnips, beets, those sturdy roots could be buried in sand or straw right on the floor. They'd stay crisp for months. Sacks of grain could be kept dry, safe from rodents under that roof. There was storage built into the architecture of survival. But building techniques evolved, and the storage space evolved with them. The medieval stone cellar became the successor to that simple pit. Now storage moved directly beneath the house or beneath the castle keep. These were engineered spaces, built from stone and mortar with vaulted ceilings to bear the weight above. They were dark, cool, with a carefully managed humidity from the surrounding earth. This wasn't just a cold hole. It was a controlled environment for transformation. This is where preservation really happened. In one corner, wheels of cheese would age slowly, developing deep flavors in the steady coolness. In another, crocks of vegetables, cabbage, cucumbers, beets would ferment into sauerkraut and pickles, their tang a vital source of vitamins. Barrels of beer would undergo a slow, secondary fermentation, the yeast working in the darkness, and then the barrels of salted meat and fish, the smoked hams hanging from the ceiling. All protected from spoilage by the constant chill. This cellar was the family's nutritional bank, or the castle's. Its contents dictated the menu for the long, lean months, when nothing grew. The difference between hardship and comfort lay in how well that stone vault was stocked. It shows something about these northern societies. Food security wasn't an abstract concept. It wasn't managed by a distant state. It was built literally into the foundation of every home. The cellar was as essential as the hearth. One provided warmth. The other provided the means to survive until the warmth returned. It was a personal form of resilience. Carved into the stone and earth beneath their feet, stone cellars were private. They were hidden, but some civilizations built storage as a public statement, a declaration of civic power. Over 4,000 years ago they did this. The great granary wasn't tucked away. It was central, monumental, one of the largest structures found there. You picture a massive mud brick platform raised high. On top, a timber frame, long gone, but its imprint remains. Rows of brick bases that held wooden columns. That created a vast covered hall, but the real engineering was underneath. Under that platform, they found a network of narrow channels, air ducts, a ventilation system designed to pull a constant flow of air beneath the grain. In the humid climate of the Indus Valley, damp was the enemy. This was the difference. That steady breeze through the ducts would wick away moisture. Would fight mold and insects before they started. This wasn't a guess. This was applied science. On a civic scale, the location is telling. It sat prominently near the city's citadel. That placement speaks of state control, a centralized authority that collected the surplus, managed it, protected it from the fertile plains around the city. The scale implies an enormous surplus, organized, enough to feed a dense urban population that wasn't farming. It fed the artisans, the potters, the traders. This granary was the economic engine. Its existence proves they solved the fundamental equation. They produced enough extra food to support specialization, and they had the technological wisdom to keep it safe. The sophistication is staggering. Other cultures used simple pits. Here was a structure with built-in climate control. It challenges a linear view of ancient progress. It tells us that ago, in what's now Pakistan, urban planners were thinking like engineers. They saw their environment as a problem to be solved, and they solved it. With bricks and timber and an understanding of the wind, the great granary wasn't just a warehouse. It was a promise made of baked earth, a promise the city would endure, that the harvest would be kept safe, and the community built upon it could look toward tomorrow. Grain was the solid foundation, but a city's lifeblood was water. Constantinople mastered storing the liquid itself. The 11th system is beneath the streets. The vast cisterns of the Byzantine and later Ottoman empires. We remember them for water, but they point to a broader truth. Storing any essential liquid was a pillar of power. The Basilica Cistern is the most famous. A subterranean palace built not for people but for a reservoir. You enter and walk on a platform above dark, still water. Your eyes adjust. You see a forest. 336 marble columns rising from the water, holding up a vaulted brick ceiling. It feels less like engineering and more like a sacred grove, a grove dedicated to survival. The engineering was precise. Thick walls lined with a special waterproof mortar, a hydraulic cement. It kept the precious contents from seeping into the earth. This cistern and dozens like it collected rainwater from aqueducts. They were the city's liquid insurance. During a siege, if an enemy cut the aqueducts, these hidden reserves could sustain hundreds of thousands for months. It turned a vulnerability, the need for constant fresh water, into a formidable strength. But this principle extended beyond water. Across the Greco-Roman world, other essential fluids were secured with the same seriousness. In port cities, you'd find massive ceramic jars called, often half-buried. These weren't for water, they were fermentation tanks. For wine, for olive oil, for that pungent fish sauce, the ketchup of the ancient world. Storing these trade goods in bulk was an economic necessity. A ship's cargo of olive oil couldn't just sit in the sun. It needed a stable, cool environment to prevent spoilage before it was sold. These underground tanks provided that. They moderated temperature, slowing the chemical changes that would ruin the product. Controlling these liquid stores meant controlling wealth and health. A city with secure water could withstand a blockade. A merchant with a full of aged wine could command a higher price. It shows ancient storage thinking was holistic. True resilience wasn't just about sacks of grain. It was about everything that sustained life and commerce. The cistern with its cathedral-like silence teaches something. Sometimes the most critical resource isn't something you can hold in your hand. It's something that flows. Something that must be captured, contained, and protected with just as much ingenuity. And reverence, the cistern held water. It was still, a silent reservoir, but commerce needed movement. Across the empty stretches between empires, goods had to flow, so storage couldn't be a destination, it had to be a pause. A heartbeat in the journey, that was the 12th system. The Silk Road Caravanserai. You picture an oasis of order, in a sea of sand and rock. A massive square fortress, high walls and a single heavy gate. At dusk in the desert, that gate was a beacon. Inside, the courtyard erupted, noise and life, the groan of camels being unloaded, chatter from merchants of a dozen lands, the smell of cooking fires and animal hide. This was more than an inn, it was a logistical miracle. A storage node in motion. The design was utilitarian, thick outer walls for security. Inside, the ground floor was a ring, storerooms and stables. A merchant caravan could rent a secure cell to cache part of their cargo. Why leave goods behind? The journey was segmented. A trader from Persia brings glassware and carpets this far. He sells some here, stores some for the return trip, purchases Chinese silk to carry east. The Caravanserai allowed for that, a place to rebalance the load. To restock supplies from its wells, to let the animals recover. This system transformed a deadly trek into a series of manageable legs. Risk was distributed. No single caravan carried its entire fortune across the continent. Goods moved in a relay, from one secure cache to the next. Think of the variety stored in those rooms: bolts of silk lighter than air, sacks of pepper and cinnamon, jade carving, ceramics in straw. Each storeroom was a miniature world market, paused in transit. This wasn't just preserving food or water. It was preserving value, preserving potential across impossible distances. The Caravanserai made the Silk Road possible. It provided an infrastructure of trust. A merchant could venture into the unknown, knowing that every 15 or 20 miles a day's journey there was a fortress of safety, a place to trade news, repair a cart, and leave something behind, and know it would be there when you returned. This system shows storage evolving. From a static safeguard into a dynamic engine, the Caravanserai wove security into the roots of commerce. It understood that for ideas to travel, for art, for innovation, the material goods had to move safely first. The relay of these didn't just store spices and silk, it stored momentum. It kept the pulse of exchange beating, one fortified courtyard at a time. The Caravanserai was a fortress for commerce, but the most important storage often wasn't along the trade routes. It was in the quiet space of a family home. In a traditional Korean courtyard, you'd see a different kind of platform, not for defense, for transformation. That's a simple raised area of stone or wood, placed carefully to catch the right mix of sun and breeze, and on it, row after row, are the large, bulbous earthenware jars. This is the 13th system. It goes beyond preservation into a kind of culinary alchemy. These jars aren't just containers, they're living ecosystems. Inside them, the basic ingredients of Korean cuisine change, slowly. Soybeans ferment into dark soy sauce, into the savory paste called chili peppers. Rice and soybeans blend into gochujang, complex, spicy sweet, and there's kimchi, cabbage and radishes seasoned and packed tight. Their long, tangy fermentation happens inside those ceramic walls. The jar is a partner in this. It's made from porous clay so it breathes, allows a tiny exchange of air, regulates the environment inside. That keeps harmful bacteria out, lets the good microbes thrive, the ones that drive fermentation. The placement on the is a science. The platform lifts the jars off the damp ground. The specific spot in the courtyard is chosen for its microclimate, enough winter sun to prevent freezing, enough summer shade to avoid overheating. The family becomes the custodian, adjusting lids, monitoring brine, tasting the slow progress. This system represents a deep understanding. Storage isn't just about preventing rot. It's about guiding decay towards something delicious, nutritious, and stable. The raw cabbage of autumn by winter becomes a probiotic staple. Rich in vitamins, it can outlast the cold. The soybean, hard and unpalatable, transforms into a foundational flavor for every meal. This is a cultural approach to security. It turns the harvest into a year-round larder, but a dynamic one, alive and full of flavor. It shows that resilience can be cultivated. Stored in plain sight, in the courtyard, in a jar that breathes with the seasons. Here, food security is woven into daily ritual, into deep culinary tradition. The family's health, their culinary identity, their ability to weather the year, it all stands there, on that platform. A silent earthenware testament to the art of waiting, to working with nature's own invisible forces. A jar of kimchi breathes in a Korean courtyard, but in the jungle, survival needed a different vessel. One carved from the living earth. The Maya lived in a green world, a world of thirst. The limestone bedrock just swallowed the rain. No rivers on the surface, no lakes. The rains would come in torrents, then a dry season for months. Their answer was a bottle-shaped chamber carved into the soft limestone. Workers would dig a narrow shaft down, then hollow out a wider chamber at the bottom. They plastered the walls with lime stucco, made them smooth, made them waterproof. It was a cistern, but it was more, a vault underground. During the rains, channels in the plazas would funnel every drop into that open shaft, fill the chamber below. A single large could hold thousands of gallons, a family's water, a small community's supply for the dry months. But that cool, dark space inside had another use. Once the dry season came and the water was gone, they repurposed the chamber. It became a storage pit, for maize, for beans, for seeds saved for the next planting. The constant temperature, the high humidity, it kept seeds viable, stopped food from drying out completely. One structure solved two problems. It captured the fleeting rain, turned a downpour into a drinking supply. Then, as that supply dwindled, the empty space became a secure larder, a seasonal rhythm built into stone. It didn't fight the landscape. It collaborated, using the very rock that created the thirst to become the solution. Sometimes the most ingenious storage isn't about building up, it's about digging down. And understanding the space you create can hold more than one kind of hope, the held water and grain, supplies that just sat there. But the most efficient larders are the ones that can restock themselves. In medieval Europe, you'd see these towers on manor estates. They weren't for defense. They were for doves. The dovecote was a 15th century system, a kind of living storage, beautiful circular structures, brick or stone with a conical roof. Inside, the walls were lined with hundreds of small nesting niches. A colony of pigeons or doves lived there, they bred there, and they were harvested there. This was protein security, but alive, on the wing. The birds would forage widely for seeds and insects. They needed very little from the people keeping them. And in return, they gave a steady supply. A renewable one, fresh eggs, and squabs, young birds for meat. That was vital, a source of fresh protein, especially in winter when other meat was scarce or salted. They also produced manure, guano, which was collected, a potent fertilizer. It went back into the gardens and fields, closing that loop. The same principle worked on the ground. The managed rabbit warren, that this wasn't just a wild patch, it was an enclosed area, often protected by a ditch and a bank. European rabbits were introduced there, carefully managed. Warreners would oversee the population, control predators, make sure the colony thrived, and rabbits breed with remarkable speed. Their value was immense. They provided tender meat, considered a delicacy. Their fur was used for clothing. Like the dovecote, this system created a perpetual supply. On site, the food was preserved simply by being alive, right up until the moment it was needed. No smoking required, no salting, no precious space in a cellar barrel. This was storage through husbandry, a mini ecosystem engineered for a continuous yield. That approach reflects a shift. Storage wasn't just about putting a surplus into a container. It could be about cultivating the source itself, containing it. It integrated food production and preservation seamlessly into the managed landscape. The dovecote and the warren turned animals into a standing pantry, one that could never truly be empty, not as long as the cycle of life continued inside those walls. This was resilience with a heartbeat, a quiet understanding. Sometimes the best way to keep something safe for tomorrow is to give it a home today, and then let nature do the rest. A living pantry works for some things, but meat and fish are different. They don't just go bad, they can become dangerous. So ancient cultures found a chemical defense, a universal one. The 16th system was a process, a set of techniques. They reshaped geography and diet. Salt curing, smoking, air drying, these methods didn't just preserve. They weaponized the environment against decay. Take salt, it's a simple crystal, a desiccant. It pulls moisture out of tissue through osmosis. In that dry, salty place, the bacteria that cause spoilage can't survive. This principle built an industry around the Mediterranean. Fish, small fish like anchovies, were layered in barrels with salt. Vast quantities of salt. They weren't just salted, they were left to ferment, to liquefy over months. The result was a pungent, savory fish sauce. It was the essential condiment of Rome. So valuable, so stable, amphorae of it have been found in shipwrecks, still sealed after 2,000 years. The salt did its job. But salt was a luxury in some places. In the forests of northern Europe, smoke was the answer. Celtic and Germanic tribes built simple smokehouses or used the space above the hearth. The smoke from smoldering hardwoods, oak or beech, it does two things. It deposits antimicrobial chemicals on the meat's surface, and the gentle heat dries it further. A ham treated this way, a side of salmon, could last for years. A compact, protein-dense ration for a warrior on the move. For a family through a long winter. Then there's wind and sun alone. In southern Africa, the Khoisan peoples made biltong, strips of game meat, antelope, lightly cured with vinegar and spices, then hung to dry in the dry savanna air. The constant breeze, the low humidity, it desiccated the meat thoroughly, creating a chewy, nutritious snack, lightweight and incredibly durable. Storage without any fire, using the climate itself as the preserving agent. These techniques needed infrastructure. A specific kind, communal smoking sheds, networks of drying racks along coastlines, mountains of salt from inland lakes. They turned a sudden bounty, a successful whale hunt, a large catch of herring into a slow-release calorie bank. This chemical ingenuity did more than prevent waste. It created new, durable trade goods. It allowed exploration. A ship could carry barrels of salted beef for months. A caravan could pack biltong for a crossing of the. The real insight is profound. Humanity learned to manipulate basic elements, salt, air, fire, to create a hostile frontier for microorganisms right on the food's surface, a form of biological warfare on a microscopic scale, a silent, constant chemical defense. It turned the most perishable prizes into the most lasting provisions. This knowledge was as vital as any granary, because it meant when the hunt was good, that success could echo through an entire hungry season. Salt and smoke could make a barrier. But in Southeast Asia, in the monsoon lands, the biggest danger was the ground itself. The earth there in those wet river landscapes, it never really dried out. If you put your rice harvest in a pit or a shed, that was a problem. Dampness was always there. Mold was always a threat. So the people along the Mekong, the Irrawaddy, they looked to their roads, their life source. And they built granaries that floated. That was the 17th system, storage that could move. Think of a big, solid barge. A thatched roof on top, like a little house right on the deck. Inside, the hull was full of sacks, new rice from the harvest. This floating platform was tied up among the river villages. You'd see it, a granary on the water. The thinking was so simple and so smart. By keeping the grain on the river, you lifted it away from the damp in the soil. The air moving over the water kept things drier than any shed on land, but it did more than that. Rats, a huge problem for grain, they couldn't get onto these floating storehouses. The water was a moat. And in a place where fighting between villages could start, a granary on land was a fixed target, easy to attack. A floating granary was. If there was trouble, the village could just untie the ropes. They could pull that heavy barge upstream into a smaller river, or take it downstream to another village, to family. They could move their whole food supply to safety. The harvest could actually run away from danger. This system took the main feature of the place, all that water everywhere, and turned it from a storage problem into the biggest advantage. It shows a deep kind of adaptability. Storage wasn't about one model for everywhere. It was about hearing what the environment was saying, and then making an answer that turned local problems into specific strengths. The floating granary didn't battle the monsoon world. It learned to live on it, to use that fluid, changing nature as a kind of shield. The rice was safe because it was never really stuck in one place. Its safety came from being able to move with the water. A floating granary could escape downstream. But in these high desert canyons, escape wasn't an option. Security meant going up. So you have the 18th system etched into the cliffs, the granaries of the Ancestral. You look up into an alcove, maybe 100 feet above the canyon floor. And there, tucked into the sandstone, you see a small, square masonry structure. A room built from fitted stone and clay mortar. Its door is just a small opening. This isn't a dwelling, it's a vault for the harvest that meant survival. The location was everything. These granaries were placed in high, south-facing alcoves. The natural rock overhang provided a deep, constant shade, and in that arid world, shade meant dryness. It protected the stores. The maize, the beans, the squash seeds. It kept them from the spoiling effects of the sun. The high elevation caught the canyon breezes, which further discouraged mold, and it discouraged pests. But the placement served another purpose. A dual, urgent purpose. It was a defense. Reaching these granaries often required a difficult climb, using hand and toe holds carved into the cliff face, or navigating a narrow ledge. This was intentional. It kept the community's surplus safe from rodents and from raiders. In a landscape of scarcity, a stored harvest was the ultimate prize. Protecting it was as critical as growing it. These cliffside chambers turned the geography itself into a guardian. The canyon wall became a natural fortress. The effort to store the grain was an investment in collective security. Each family or clan might have their own small granary, creating a dispersed network, a secure network of caches across the cliff face. If one was found, the others might remain hidden. This system speaks to a practical wisdom, a profound practical wisdom. It shows an intimate reading of the microclimate, knowing exactly which crevice stayed dry, which rock shelf caught the right air current, and it shows a strategic mind. They understood that their greatest vulnerability was also their greatest asset, the very isolation that made life hard here, the verticality of the world. It could be harnessed, it could become a shield. Building these granaries was an act of faith in the future, a belief that the seeds saved today, locked in a stone box against the sky, would be there to plant and to eat when the rains returned. It was storage as an act of resilience, not through mobility like the floating barge, but through an immovable, elevated secrecy. The cliff held their hope aloft, where few could reach it. Watching over the silent canyon below, the granaries held the next harvest, but the harvest started with something smaller, a seed. Saving the best seed was the deepest kind of storage. The 19th system, the communal seed vault. Every farming community had one, long before the Arctic vault. This wasn't just storing grain to eat. It was setting aside the grain you wouldn't eat, the chosen seeds for next year's field. The containers for this were special, not just any pot. Often they were beautiful, tightly woven baskets sealed with clay, ceramic jars with narrow necks and heavy lids, or sometimes just a dry-lined pit in a cool, dark corner. Their job was singular, to make a perfect, stable environment, to keep the seed dormant but alive, to preserve its chance to sprout. Moisture was the enemy. One damp season could ruin everything, so these were made for absolute dryness. The selection was the real art. At harvest, the elders would walk the fields, the most experienced farmer. They looked for the strongest plants, The ones that resisted disease, that stood tall in the wind, that had the fullest heads of grain. From those plants they took the best seeds. This was artificial selection, early and conscious. It wasn't chance, it was a deliberate act. Year after year this practice sculpted the crops. It adapted them slowly to the local soil, the local climate, the local pests. It built resilience right into the plant's code. These seed collections became communal treasures, guarded by a trusted elder or a family head, a spiritual leader. Their custody was a sacred duty. In many cultures, the seed pot was more than a pantry. It was an heirloom, a physical link between generations. The knowledge of which seeds performed best and why was passed down orally with the seeds themselves. This was storage on many levels. Biological storage, yes, but also cultural storage. It preserved agricultural wisdom. Local biodiversity, a deep, place-based understanding of the land. This system was the ultimate hedge against disaster. If a season brought blight or drought and the crop failed, all wasn't lost. The community still held the blueprint, the seeds from the previous successful year. They could replant, they could begin again. This turned recovery from a desperate hope into a planned possibility. It was a forward-thinking mindset, an intergenerational contract. The work of the grandparents selecting those seeds fed the they'd never meet. That simple, careful act of choosing a seed and setting it aside is the unbroken thread of agriculture, the bedrock of all sustainable farming. It recognizes the most valuable thing to store isn't the food for today, it's the living code for all the food of tomorrow. The communal seed vault was a promise to the future, sealed in clay and woven fiber. A promise that life would continue. That seed pot was a promise to the future. But some promises were made to powers beyond the harvest. The 20th system, the final one, moves from the granary into the temple, the storage of sacred reserves. In cultures all over the world, a part of the harvest wasn't just saved, it was consecrated, set aside in a special place for a special purpose. This was storage that went beyond the practical. It wove food security right into the fabric of belief. In ancient Egypt, temples weren't just houses of worship. They were economic powerhouses with their own granaries. A share of the state's collected grain was dedicated to the temple of Amun or Osiris. This was an offering, a tangible thank you to the gods for the Nile's flood. But it also created a divine surplus, a buffer held in the name of the deity administered by the priests. And in times of severe crisis, when the state's reserves ran low, these sacred stores could be released to feed the people. They often were. The gods' bounty became the people's salvation, a spiritual insurance policy with a very practical payout. We see this same principle in the Americas. For the Maya, deep inside a temple pyramid, archaeologists find caches, not of jewels but of sustenance, perfect ears of maize, bundles of beans, placed there as offerings during construction. This wasn't food forgotten, it was food given, an act of reciprocity with the divine forces that controlled rain and sun. By entrusting the essence of their harvest to the sacred space, they were spiritually investing in the next one. The temple became a bank of faith, with maize as its currency. This intertwining of the spiritual and the practical is profound. It shows how ancient societies didn't separate survival from ceremony. Storing food was a cultural act full of meaning. The communal act of setting aside the first fruits, the best portion that reinforced social bonds. It reminded everyone that their abundance was a gift, not a guarantee. And it placed the management of that critical surplus in the hands of a trusted authority, often a moral authority. The priests or elders who oversaw these reserves were accountable not just to the community, but to the gods themselves. That added a powerful layer of sanction to the entire system, a layer of trust. So these sacred reserves served a dual purpose. They placated the heavens, seeking favor for future seasons. And they sat, physically present, as a last line of defense. A final, solemn cache that could be opened only in utmost need, opened with ritual and reverence. This system embeds a powerful truth. For our ancestors, security was holistic. It wasn't just about the science of preservation or the logistics of distribution. It was also about the story they told themselves. The story that their survival was part of a larger covenant between the earth and the sky, between the people and the powers they believed in. The most resilient storage system, then, might have been the one that fortified the spirit, as surely as it filled the stomach. These systems weren't just about survival. They were about building a future You see it in the monumental granary and in the humble seed pot. They all point to a kind of universal truth. Our resilience is engineered, it's built. Our ancestors were masterful innovators, but they didn't work in a vacuum. They looked at their world, the desert heat, the monsoon rains, the cliff faces, the frozen nights, and they asked a simple question: how can we use what is here to protect what we have? The answer was never just one technology. It was a system woven from local materials, from deep ecological knowledge, from intricate social organization. They didn't fight their environment, they collaborated with it. They turned problems into solutions. The damp earth of a forest became a natural refrigerator. The dry desert wind became a cooling tower. The river that could flood a village also became a moat to protect its grain. That's the real ingenuity. Seeing potential where others saw only limitation. And these systems were always more than warehouses. They were the quiet foundations of everything that came after. The granary allowed for the first tax collector, the first scribe, the first soldier who didn't farm. The state silo created the economic stability to build a pyramid. The communal seed vault preserved the genetic wisdom that fed generations. Storage was the original infrastructure of civilization. It was the tool of statecraft. The engine of trade, the embodiment of cultural wisdom passed from elder to child. So what does that mean for us now, in a world of global supply chains and digital inventories? The past offers quiet lessons. Our challenges with resource management, with sustainability, with preparing for the unexpected, they aren't new. The core principles these ancient systems teach are timeless. Security comes from diversity, not from a single source. A network across a mountain range is more resilient than one giant warehouse. True preparedness is about intelligent communal stewardship. It's about systems designed for reciprocity, like the ever-normal granary that smoothed out feast and famine for an entire society. And maybe most importantly, survival was never about hoarding in fear. It was about saving with purpose. It was that forward-looking act of burying a seed, or building a cistern, or setting aside the first fruits. It was an investment in a shared tomorrow. These 20 ancient systems are more than historical curiosities. They are blueprints for building resilience on any scale. They remind us that the greatest resource we have isn't what we store, but our capacity to think, to adapt, and to build systems that care for